So Gilly, I thought it'd be really interesting for me, because I think I fished a chalk stream maybe 22, 23 years ago.
Long time ago.
And you know I love my trout fishing.
Indeed.
And I grew up on the wharf, which I still live by, and I spend a lot of time on the wharf, on the Ewer and on here. But since we've known each other, I've known of your reputation as a guide and qualified casting instructor, and I know that you spend a tremendous amount of time down on the Chalkstream to testing the itching. And I just thought it'd be really fun to kind of talk about. I don't know how many people here have fished the Chalkstreams down there.
Any of you guys fish down there? So it's very, very different in that the main difference is the water is absolutely gin clear. Okay, so this is slightly acidic. Our water is alkaline. Basically, the rain comes down, the water comes out of bournes to enter into the river, and we've got huge aquifers which store the water and just release it all year. So we're very, very fortunate in that it can rain. Well, we've had a lot of rain, haven't we, this year? It's actually up at the moment. But even in the middle of sort of June, we could have 5 days rain, you can still go fishing because it just doesn't colour up, which is fantastic for us as anglers. One of the disadvantages of having that crystal clear water is that they can see you. We're looking for them, they're looking for us. And I know we touched, they were touching on sort of stalking and hunting that fish. Very much, I mean, I've actually got mirrored glasses, which isn't really ideal. Anything to take off that flash. And also the pressure on the chalk streams. I don't know how often these bits of water are fished.
I mean, probably fairly, in comparison, very lightly. And I think the difference is, Gilly, is obviously we've got big, wide expanses of water, so we fish pretty quickly and cover quite a bit of water.
So the test from source to sea is 40 miles. But we've got lots of carriers that were built a long time ago because it used to be water meadows and used to flood it. So we've all these carriers, so we've got 80 miles of fishing. And pretty much from mid-April till the 14th of October, almost every single beat has anglers on it. So the pressure on the fish is absolutely enormous. We do get stocking, so there are some beats you can still find where it's truly wild. But again, the stockfish move up and down. And the reason we stock it is that the demand for fishing is so high. I'm sure, as you probably know, that it's what they call the birth. I'm sure a lot would disagree, but kind of historically, it's the birthplace of dry fly fishing. So we get anglers coming from all over the world to fish it. And I love coming somewhere like this because to me, you know, I can't see the fish. I'm used to spotting the fish and figuring out what they're doing. And really, in a way, it's quite good because when you can see the fish, you know, are they down on the bottom? Are they feeding on the bottom on nymphs? It's quite obvious. Are they up in the water column? Can you see them eating on emerges? Are they just coming up on the surface? Is there a hatch going on and they're taking done? You know, are they coming up? Is it late in the afternoon and they're coming up really slowly and sipping flies off and taking the spent? So it's great in a way in that you get so many clues as to what fly to put on. And obviously the season changes throughout the year. But going back, before I go on, just going back to that thing about, and I know the guys touched on it earlier, but approach is everything on the test. And so often I get anglers that come down and they'll get to a beat and they'll walk up and down the beat a couple of times. Well, they've already gone, hi, you know, we're here. And the fish are like, oh God, we're going to get down to the bottom and do nothing. So very much you get to the bottom of the beat. And the other thing with the test and the itchin and the wily and the nada and all these chalk streams, there is a very strict etiquette, which a lot of people find really boring, but having fished it for a long time, I now understand why. So we only cast upstream or across. We never, ever cast downstream. And in fact, if you go on any beats on any of the chalk streams and you're caught casting downstream, you will be asked to leave. Okay, it's that. Now, you might all be thinking, well, that's just ridiculous. The reason we do that is because we can see the fish. So for me here, I'd be looking at seams of water, I'd be looking at foam lines, I'd be figuring out where I thought the fish were. It's much harder. When you walk up the riverbank and you can see all the fish, obviously it's going to be easier. So it's all about that sporting element, you against them and giving them a chance. Does that make sense? So
Can I ask you a question, Gilly?
yes.
With reference to that, are you looking, do you have to wait? I know, assuming that you now told us, and I kind of knew that you had to fish upstream.
Yes.
Are you waiting for, do you have to wait for a fish to rise to target that fish? Or does that differ between beats? Or if you spot a fish subsurface,
Yeah.
can you, and you know it's feeding on nymphs, can you still throw over
So
the top
it
of
used to be, when I started sort of 25 years ago, a lot of the beats, and I think still the Houghton Club, which is very few women I think get to fish there, it still has that thing of it's dry fly only up until about 14th of July. There is a beat on the upper test called Tufton, and it's dry fly all year. And I went there last year and I said to the riverkeeper, you are joking, it's not really dry fly. He was like, no, if I see you with a nymph on, I'll ask you to leave. I was like, oh crikey. Walked round the corner, all the way up the river, hatching insects all day long. You know, it was just fantastic. But that's quite few and far between, okay? Because we all know, you know, we haven't got as many, the insect life is not as good as it used to be. But yeah, so so now quite a few of the beats, because it's difficult, because we've got stock beats, because you're paying a lot of money, people are now saying, okay, if you want to nymph, whatever gives you pleasure. But they are very strict on numbers that you can catch. I don't know what, if I was trout fishing here, how many could I catch?
Until you've had enough.
Okay, so
how many you can kill, obviously, and take with
Yeah.
you is a completely different kettle of fish. And most people will, generally speaking, put the trout back or maybe take the occasional one for the table. But no limit put on. Certainly not on the waters I fish, on the
No.
3 rivers that I fish. I can't think, yeah, I'm never limited to the number of fish
And
I can physically hook and release.
And I think that must seem quite mad to people here, but down there, I kind of get it. I mean, you will go, some places you'll see a lot of fish. And actually the problem is, can you imagine imagine we've had 8 people on this beat and they're thrashing it to death all day, catching 30 fish each. You all then come tomorrow, you're just not going to get near those fish. And if it's catch and release, they're all being pricked. So basically, I think it's actually quite sensible to have a number.
And did most people take the fish, Gilly? So
When I started 25 years ago, people would come, they catch 2 or 3 fish, really happy and go home. Now they want to catch their limit. You get the older guys who are quite happy just to
catch and kill the limit. Or
So
catch.
not on most beats, it's maybe kill 2. Because most people
Right.
don't want more than that.
No.
You know, take a couple home. You've got to remember these are stocked, a lot of them. Most places are wild as always release, but it's kind of catch 2, kill them, and then you can catch a further 4. But 6 is about the limit on any beat. But they can be this big, and they are rather lovely. But I think if you came down, if you've never done it before and you came down and you saw the water, you could see the fish, you then all go, oh my God, this is amazing, because it's so beautiful. I mean, it really is lovely.
I think for me, just generally fishing, I'm very fortunate. I get to do lots of
Yeah.
fishing into very kind of crazy places for all kinds of crazy species. But I don't really have a favourite species, but I do love sight fishing.
Oh,
Doesn't matter
just
whether it's the
everything.
saltwater
I
or it's
agree.
been the jungle
Yeah,
trips
I think so.
or even further up for salmon on the
Yeah.
Eden in places where I
Yeah.
can see them and picking them up on nymphs and things. I love that visual
Yeah.
aspect. So I
And-
get that hunting side of it, definitely.
And I know that you touched on flies earlier, and so I do think, I think like anywhere, we get hatches at different times of the year, don't we? So at the moment, we've got lots of granum here. It's the same down south. We've got granum. It's our first small sedge that really comes off. Fish have just woken up from winter. We still have overwintered stockies, and we've got plenty of wild in there as well. So the granum is a really important fly. And in fact, back in the 1930s, before we'd all that silt in the river, now got a lot of silt everywhere. People used to come from London for the granum hatch. They didn't actually come for the mayfly at all. There wasn't that many mayfly. It's only since we got more silt, we're getting more and more mayfly. It's really fascinating. So, yeah, so I think approach is everything, and not rushing in to go and fish. Actually stand there and watch it, figure out when you see. So there's a wonderful story of a lady who's 85. She goes to one beach, she sits down with a coffee in the morning and a paper, and she watches. When she sees a rise, she goes out, catches the fish, she then sits back down. She always catches her limit every time she fishes, and she only stays in the same spot. And I do think a lot of people spend too much time walking up and down looking for fish, but we're lucky because we can see them there. Does that make sense? So kit-wise, should we move, or do you want to
Yeah,
talk
I was just going to
flies
ask you a
yet?
question about hatches.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the granum, and obviously I associate the test with the mayfly.
Yeah.
I heard you saying the other night in the pub the Mayfly looked like they were starting earlier.
Yeah, I mean, normally, so depending on where you are on the test, the middle test, the Mayfly start coming off about 14th, 15th of May, and then they finish about 3rd of June. It just depends. So the upper test is a week later. I don't know why, but they're a week later. But already, there's reports, people are seeing them now, which means we're going to have a very early Mayfly season, which is why some beats actually start their Mayfly period on the 1st of May and finish it on the 30th. Because they just don't know. We don't know. And it's really difficult. People paid a lot of money for the Mayfly and they've been and gone, you know. But that's fishing, that's what it is, because you pay a premium to come on the Mayfly time. But it is great fun and they do go crazy for them. But what I find interesting is they turn off them quite, after they've kind of gorged themselves in the duns, they actually turn off and they will only take the spent patterns. But it is important, the insect life is important. So I was just saying earlier to Jim that sometimes you get a cold, wet day, you'll have big Mayfly like that coming off the water everywhere. And you're seeing fish rising, you're trying all your patterns, they're not feeding on Mayfly. Get down and you'll see tiny little iron blues. We don't have as many as we used to, but it's a little inky blue, tiny little fly. The fish, don't ask me why, they must taste better, but they turn off and they switch. So I think very much, I think the guys were talking earlier about presentation, we'll talk about that in a moment, but presentation of your fly onto the water is really, really important. And a lot of people will say you can have the wrong fly, but good presentation, you'll catch your fish. I think down on the test, it's really, you need good presentation, but if you've got the wrong fly on, those fish will not take it. They are super fussy. I've been out and they are locked onto one insect and they won't take anything else. So learning a little bit about entomology, you don't need to, I mean, I've got boxes of flies if anybody wants to have a look, but you don't need to, but you do need to kind of have a better idea, and the season changes. So as a general rule, it's probably the same here, the granums start very small. That's our first sedge that we see of the year. And then as the year goes through September, we get bigger and bigger sedges. So end of the year, we've got big cinnamon sedges, nice and easy, very visual to see in the water, and the fish are battering them, hammering them. But with the up-winged flies, we start off April, we've got large dark olives, you'll have those up here. Yeah. Then they just disappear. We then go on to the big Mayfly and then blue-winged olives and medium olives, and it just gets down. So by the time, so I'm starting the season, large dark olive 14, Mayfly 8 and 10, and then by the time we get to the end of the season, August, when I'm fishing in August, I'll be fishing with 20s, 22s, really, if I can see to tie them on, but really, really small. Talking about leaders, I've deliberately left on, I've got a 9-foot leader on here. How many of you fish with longer leaders, or are you, most of you 9-foot leaders? Yeah, no, yeah. All depends. So a lot of people, so the standard, I don't know what it's like here, but the standard at home down on the test is most people turn up with a 9-foot 5-weight rod. Early season, fish are hungry, they've just gone in, there's lots of them, and the wild ones are hungry, they've been wintering, you know, they're ready to eat. So you can get away with a 9-foot 5-weight, and the river's kind of higher, it's quite often windy, you've got enough gunch to get out there. But beyond all doubt, once you get past that Mayfly, and we have weed cut, you don't have weed cutting here, do you? So
too cold for
because
weed.
the river is alkaline, we get fantastic growth of weed. And if the boys didn't get in and cut the weed, the whole river would become unfishable. And we'd all be exhausted because of all the Mayfly. So we get to the beginning of June and the whole river shuts down for 10 days. And it's a relief for the fish, it's a relief for us. And then when we go back, Mayfly have gone and we're then on to small flies. Now, when they cut the weed actually holds the water up. So when they cut it, it drops, you go back and the whole river is just dropped by about a foot, it's amazing.
Really?
Maybe not as much as that, but
wild.
it's dropped right down. And it's also clearer because they've got nice spots now. So everything, you've got to up your game. So I get a lot of fishermen coming in July and August and they're going, we're just not catching. And they've got 9-foot 5-weights. It's too heavy in the water. The fish feel that line, it lands in the water and they're like, oh God, here we go again. So I fish, I've got a 9-foot 9 rod here, which is, in fact, I actually use it pretty much all year. I love it. And it's a 4-weight. And it's perfect. It's still got enough gumption to actually get out there, but it's lighter on the water. It just makes that little bit of difference. So yes, I could drop down to a 3-weight, but the problem is some of the fish it depends where you are on the test, but some of them are big. And if you're practicing catch and release, it's hot, you've got less dissolved oxygen in the water. What you don't want to be doing is fighting a great big fish, bringing it in slowly and then going, off you go, because it's going to die. So I say to most people, if you can stick to a 4, it just depends how good you are. If you're happy, go down to a 3, as long as you can get that fish in really quickly. Leaders, so as I say, I've got a short leader on, you'll get away, big mayfly patterns, you can get away with a 9-foot leader, and the fish are just going crazy anyway. But by preference, I totally agree. So lovely story, had a chap who was 70, always used a 9-foot leader. And we got to the river and I said, look, we need to put a 12-foot leader on at least. He said, I can't do that, Gilly. No way, I don't want to. So, okay, so he was having a cup of tea. So I just put one on, put a bit of tippet on. I think it was probably about 14 foot. Put the fly on, saw a rising fish, gave him, rather than catch the fish, he turned around and he said, oh, did you see my presentation? That was fantastic. And I said, that's because you've got a 14-foot leader on. And he said, I can't believe that. And he said, of all the things you've taught me over the years, changing my leader has completely transformed my fishing. So I think that's a big thing.
The tapered, obviously, Gilly. I
Always
can guess
tapered,
be when
yeah.
you're chucking the mayfly patterns about as well.
Yeah.
Pretty wind resistant.
Yeah, which is why sticking with the 9-foot, and normally for the big mayfly, most people are using 6-pound leaders, 5-pound leader breaking strain. But obviously, as you start to get down to those tiny flies, you've got to be adding tippet and getting down to, and it is a tricky one, because if you're on a bit of water where you've got big fish and you're dropping down to 3 pound, make sure the nylon you're using is very strong, because you do get some that is not as good as others. Some nylon just breaks. So make sure you do use it. But I also think they've done, you know, there's been filming, folk have filmed it, where they've gone out and said, right, okay, let's just see how thick a leader we can get away with. The problem that you get with a small fly and thick leader, they've been talking about drag. Now imagine you've got a thick leader on a teeny size 18 or something, or 20. You put that out, that leader is thick, and those tiny currents almost instantly hits the water. Even if you put a bit of slack in, they're going to drag that little fly around in the wrong way. And not in a million years will those Chalkstream fish take that. It has got to come down absolutely perfectly with the current. That makes sense?
Total sense. So when you talk about size of fish, Gilly, how big are these fish getting?
Well,
Does it depend on
there's a bit of
the
controversy
river?
at the moment, because they've stopped for a long time because of demand for fishing. Yeah. And it is a big industry. It brings in a lot of money to everyone, the hotels, the garage, you know, everyone benefits from these rivers. So we don't want to stock it. If we stop stocking, there's just not enough fish. So it depends on where you are. The upper test, really £2 be maximum. 2 to 3 pound maybe, but on the middle test, the premium beats, they're putting quite big fish in, you know, and average size would be £5, 4 or 5 pound would be average size, but then you'll get some bigger double. Well, they're trying to stop the double figures, and actually, to be honest, I think it's right, because the problem with the big fish is we still have, well, we think we might have salmon, par and things in the water, and we don't want those big fish, because the big fish, they will take mayfly, but I can tell you, after the mayfly, those big fish will not take, you know, they're eating other fish. You know, streamer fishing, which we're not allowed to do, you would be catching those big fish. But those big, so what we try to do, sometimes they put some big fish in early on for the mayfly, because people like it. We want them out, and then it becomes more normal fishing. So I actually, although the mayfly is quite fun and my heart always leaps when I see the first one of the year, by the end of it, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad they're finished, so glad they've gone. Now we can get on with some real fishing. Yeah, so.
And then the grayling fishing, is the grayling fishing on the Chalkstream?
Oh, very, very much so, and it's becoming a big thing. So it drops down in price as well. So
right.
The only problem is it's trying to find beats that allow grayling fishing. So we have got some beats which are open for grayling. Wellwell Estate, which is top end of the test, upper test, is classic for grayling fishing, and it's
sight
great.
fishing again.
Sorry?
Sight fishing again. For
sight
those.
fishing again. Sometimes in large dark colours, we get large dark colours coming off all winter. So even a cold, wet, snowy day, sometimes you'll get them coming off, and they will come up. But most people are nymphing for them, either, you know, the standard clink hammer, New Zealand rig, clink hammer with a nymph. You're allowed to do that on the test when it's for grayling, but absolutely no way you're allowed to do 2 flies on the test at any time of year, which is a bit of a shame on times.
Really? So
Yep.
single fly only?
Single fly, upstream.
So I guess it's
or
like a kind of sporting, almost like a golfing handicap in a way that the
yeah,
rules
it
are
is,
put
and
in
I mean,
place.
it is tricky because some days are really easy, and some days, like any fishing, can be really
yeah.
hard. But if people have, they bought one special day, you kind of want them to get a fish.
Yeah.
Which is why I get employed as a guide.
How long are the beats, Gilly? I guess that depends. So if like you and I, if you booked us some fishing and you
So
said...
the one I've got Lower Mills 900 metres, is it? Yards, yeah. It's not that big for two people.
So you've got to be really patient, I guess. But like going back to what you were saying about observing everything that's going on, spotting your fish, moving carefully in your approach to the water, it makes sense, like you're saying, people just get there, pay the money and just
walk up and
down and up
Although
and down.
dogs are running up and down, and it doesn't work. But it still transfers to this. Wherever you're going fishing, stalking stills are really important. Not having flash. I mean, I've got these blue glosses, but flashy stuff, all that kind of thing. It's tiny. I think when you get to a certain standard when you're fishing, and then it's like, but why are they catching more? And it's the incrementals. It's the lighter rods. It's the longer leaders. Having a better understanding of entomology, and minimising your casting. I cannot tell you how many times I see guys casting. Just pick it up and let it go. One cast. Just you don't need to cast again and again. We're quite lucky in the Chalkstreams in that a lot of the time when we're fishing, because it's sight fishing, you're actually casting quite close. It's not big distance casting. And the problem, sometimes I get guys, and obviously
when you say not big distance, would you say from here to the kind of the water?
That's quite far.
Is it?
Yeah, that's quite far. If you were doing that, the problem is we've got a lot of fish. So if you're thinking, I can see something rising way up there, I'm just going to cast at it, you're lining a whole load of fish maybe before. So it is very much sight fishing, which is, I like prospecting, but I think there is something really special about seeing dry fly coming off and seeing a fish coming up.
That must be a difficult time to strike. Because if you've seen the fish, if you're looking at your target...
Mayfly are the worst. So mayfly are really big, and because they're so big, the fish, when they first get on them, they kind of struggle to take them, even the big trout. So what we sometimes do is get people to actually open the hand up to actually have it like that, so that it's then a kind of slow lift.
A delay.
People do that straight away, and the fish, where did the fly go?
Yeah,
but that's with the mayfly on the big flies.
You must feel like you're. You must feel like you've got to you're almost preempting the strike when you can see them coming.
Yeah.
Come in and come in and come in and come in and
That's
come in.
the only thing you do get people, just being too quick. So, but because it's so visual, you learn so quickly. So I think really for me, learning fly fishing, in a way, I learned on a lake and then went to the river as a whole new world. But because everything was so visual, it was quite easy to learn. And I find coming up here is a challenge for me because it's a different, I've lost that third dimension complete. So I've then really got to figure out what the fish are doing.
It's a good point. I remember going to Iceland salmon fishing for the first time.
That's awesome.
And being able to observe, watching James and other people fishing for salmon, and me being up on a big high cliff and looking at fish and seeing the flies coming over them and how they behaved, how they reacted differently.
You learn
so
much from watching.
You're right.
We were talking about flies earlier, and I think Runa was talking about CDC patterns. So when I started fishing, it was very much the classic flies that you all have heard of. So Greenwells, Lund's particular, sort of hackled flies. They were the kind of classics that we all use. Now, emerging patterns. If you're a fish, what is going to be easier to take? It's always going to be able to, you're always going to go where you're not going to have to expend a lot of energy. So emerging fly patterns, where the fly sits slightly in the water, CDC patterns, I use more and more and more. And there's a fantastic book written by, in fact, it's a digital book you can get on Amazon, by Peter Hayes and Don, how's his surname pronounced? Yeah, you can get it on Amazon, and they spent 4 years filming fish from under the water and on the top of the water, and just watching them. And he said literally 95% of the time, the fish don't want to come up to the top. It's why would you bother? It's so much easier to take a cripple than it ever is to come up onto the surface. Also recognising rise forms, I'm sure you all know that. So, the way the fish come up to the top, are they coming, are you seeing them just under the surface? So that's when they're probably just taking the emerges. Just before they get up, just see them come up like that. Are they actually coming right up and you're getting rings all over the water? That means they're taking the ones taking off. is it sort of late afternoon and you're suddenly hearing. So I had a great day when I was out. I hadn't been fishing very long. I was out with an older guy, and there was sedge. It was 6 PM, and there was sedge everywhere. So I put on my black sedge, put on my brown sedge, changed all my sedges. Couldn't catch these fish at all. And he came up and he said, right, I want you to shut your eyes. I was like, that's a bit weird. Okay, shut your eyes and I want you to listen. And I could hear a kiss. And I turned around and I said, they're taking spent, aren't they? Because these fish were really slowly, and I should have known, because with sedge, they grab them. Because the sedge fly around, they flutter around like a moth, and they have a bundle of eggs under their tummy, and they basically drop eggs, drop eggs, drop it. They go onto the surface and up, onto the surface and up. And so the fish know they've got to be super quick to get them. So interestingly, when I'm fishing with an emerging pattern or a classic hackle pattern, and those fish are coming up onto the duns, I want my fly to have a nice, we talked about, you could hear everybody talking about the drift earlier. I want my fly up there to lazily come over the fish and the fish come up and take it, because that's what a natural would do. It's warming its body so it can fly off. With a sedge, if you have a long drift, they won't take it for love nor money. So if you're the fish, that's where I want my fly on the sedge, on the fish. I put it as close to the fishes, because that's what they expect. The sedge drops down, lays eggs and takes off. So if they see something just land in front of them, they'll hammer it. So rise forms are really important, and also time of day. Although last year we had very cold northeasterly winds, and we weren't getting the mayfly. Mayfly normally take off about 4 PM, just wasn't happening. If you stayed till 10 o'clock, the spinner falls were phenomenal. So where were they all coming from? And they think, at night the wind drops. The duns were coming off overnight.
Right.
Overnight. They only live for a day, then coming back the next night to lay their eggs.
Got you.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Nature's extraordinary, isn't it? So all these things give you clues. It's just, I think the biggest thing you get as a fisherman, I can't tell you, observation is everything. The minute I get out of the car and I'm walking the river, I'm looking at everything around me. The classic cobwebs. What can I see? I was telling you about that ant pattern.
Oh yeah, I was going to mention that.
So I was on the river one day last year and turned up. 2 of my friends had been fishing for a couple of hours, and as you looked up the river, you could see all these fish rising. And sometimes it's easy to identify a fly. Sometimes you look up and it's like, I've no idea what they're taking. There's something, but it's tiny. I don't know what it is. And they said, we've tried a size 20 Adams, we've tried this, nothing. And I was like, oh God, I don't know. So I kind of got down anyway, I went like that, and I had this pack on. And I went like that, and sitting there was a flying ant. I thought, ooh. So I put a flying ant on, and I caught all my fish in an hour. They were going crazy, and they were absolutely locked onto that flying ant. They just didn't want anything.
It's crazy sometimes how they can lock onto something and ignore everything else.
And I definitely think down there you do get to know the season and what's going to be coming up. But I think it is that as you go through the season, rods get longer. And the reason why have a longer rod, I don't know if they covered that earlier, but for me, what I like, so on the riverbanks where I am, because they're all mown, it's like a lawn when you go to some of these beats. And obviously the insects, they need vegetation to lay their eggs and everything. So what they've now done, thank goodness, is pretty much all the beats have vegetation up to about here. And one beat last year I got to, the vegetation was up to here, and I said, I can't guide, you need to cut it, I can't see over the top of it. So obviously with a longer rod, it's just easier to get over. It's just much easier than a shorter rod. I actually find now, I'm so used to fishing with longer rods that when I started, everybody had I don't remember the days, 8'6".
Yeah.
Everybody had an 8'6" rod, and then going to 9 foot was like, whoa, I don't know
I remember
about
walking into Alistair Robgents, and Guideline used to do an 8'6" 5-weight.
Yeah, and that would be the standard, absolute standard.
And it had a little mayfly on the bottom, engraved in the bottom of the handle, and Alistair was like, I can't believe you've stopped doing this rod, bring this rod back immediately. Yeah, so that was his.
And then it progressed to 9 foot, and beyond all doubt, and pretty much all the instructors I know, all the guides I know, if you ask them what they fish, it's either 9 foot, 9 or 10 foot. Because it's just easier. And we talked about, you've seen the guys doing presentation casts where you're putting a little bit of slack in. Well, with a longer rod, you've just got more reach to put slack in. It's just why make life difficult for yourself? It's just different if you're in a tiny little area where there's lots of vegetation and things and you need a short rod. But for most of the time, it just makes life a lot easier.
That 9.9 for me has just been an absolute revelation.
Well, me too. Ooh,
it doesn't feel like you've almost got a 10-foot rod in your hand, does it? And that extra reach. I mean, it's different for me, Gilly, because I can fish my spiders and my wets on. I can do my dry dropper stuff with it. If I'm carrying one rod, I can fish just dries with it as well.
Yeah.
It's just a cool thing to...
And again, yeah, so if you are allowed to nymph, and most places now do allow nymphing, having that longer reach is just a lot easier. You can almost, even just with a setup, not actually a French leader, but a setup like this, you can actually sort of have it quite short and you're just fishing off the leader, if you can see the fish, and you're just holding it down. With a 9 foot, it's just so stunted. Does that make sense? It's just a lot easier.
No wading.
We've got, so most of the beats aren't, and we have a bit of a, some people aren't too keen in you getting in and you're kicking up the ranunculus and you're disturbing the riverbed, but we have got some beats of wading, and personally I like being in the water, I love it. And again, if you're in the water, you haven't got vegetation anywhere, you can do nice back casts, you know, you can, one of the biggest things, we were talking, listening to the guys, I don't know if they covered this earlier, but one of the things I see a lot, people turn up and their overhead is actually pretty good. Most people can kind of, you know, this is what you've all been taught to do, lift it up, and out. But suddenly you're walking along a bank and there is a fish that far out from the edge, okay? You can't get to it from the bank, so the only way you're going to get to it is to side cast like that. And I cannot tell you how many people cannot alter the plane. The casting is exactly the same. It's still there. And I know beginning of the season, well, before season, after Christmas, I start going out onto my lawn and casting. And I do a kind of routine where I go up, over the top, over the top, over the top, to the side, and then gradually just drop it down, drop it down, drop it down, and then over to my left side. Another thing I see people doing as well, sometimes you have to cast over your left shoulder, okay? So people struggle with casting over the left shoulder, and I would say one of the first things is actually change your body position. So when I'm casting, that's a target, my fish is a target, I'm out there. But if I'm casting over that side, I actually quite often change my foot position because it's just better tracking. Now, if your backstop is here, the biggest problem I see is people do that. And so if you think about that, the minute you do that, it's nowhere near the fish, is it? Because you pulled it out to the side. So it's here. It's like your hands in a tube, you're going straight forward, and that will give you that nice straight cast, okay? That's, yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Accuracy-wise, Gilly, I'm guessing, you know, how many shots are you generally getting at these fish? And how far
you'll put them down, basically like all fishing, you know, your first cast at that fish is really your best chance. So what I would say in that situation is make that one really count. You know, sometimes you'll get fish which are really feeding and you'll be able to cast at them repeatedly. But a lot of fish, they just kind of go, we just know.
So would you false cast, if you're coming up from behind then, are you false casting, so the fish is kind of upstream of us in the position we can take a shot, and definitely not downstream, I get that bit.
Not downstream.
So,
sometimes I'll say to people, because obviously it's quite difficult to gauge the distance, and you might be walking around with, you know, a piece of line like that, and suddenly you've got this fish out there, and a lot of people are like that. They're false casting right out in front of them, So this fish is sitting there, crystal clear water, crystal blue skies, and suddenly you see something whacking over the top of its head. You're done for. So what I say to people is quite often is, rather than cast at that fish, get your distance here, get your distance behind you until you've got what you think you need, then make the cast. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's just a lot easier, but definitely minimizing your casting and get into the habit. A lot of people just think, oh, I can't cast that far. Well, just get into the habit of it. Just get used to first cast, just putting it out there, okay? And one of the great things as well that the guys were talking about earlier is trying to put some slack into that cast. Should we go down to the water?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yes?
Explain the downstream, not casting downstream.
Okay, so the reason we're not allowed to do it is they think it's too easy, because it's not natural. So if you cast something round and you've got a fly that's whizzing through the water at speed, that's not what, I mean, have you ever seen a river sample? So if you get a river sample and you look at all those nymphs, all the Bate nymphs and caddis larvae, they don't move at speed, you know, they kind of dart around, or they move, even the shrimp, the gammas, they don't move very quickly. And so it's considered bad form because it's considered slightly cheating. It's just, I think if you saw how clear it was, it does seem draconian, but actually when you're actually doing it, it kind of makes sense.
We fish abroad, you know, and sight fishing, you know, and stop by and feed. We fish on the continent. We fish it a lot downstream drought.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I don't think there's a need to. And it's really funny because I'll go out with friends up here and it's like team of spiders, you know, across and down, and I'm like, ugh, because it's so drilled into me, it's upstream or across. I find it really hard. And I feel, because I'm not used to it, I feel I'm not connected. I'm a bit, when I do that, I'm like, I don't really know what my flies are doing, I do, in the winter when I'm grayling fishing and Euro nymphing, then yeah, I mean, I'm searching all the little pockets out, but that's close in to you, do you know what I mean? But actually casting out a team of flies, because I'm just not used to doing it, so I need a lesson for doing that, because it's just not what I do.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Why you thought it's not the done thing to cast a dry fly down?
I think it's just that tradition, Gilly, isn't
I
it?
think it's just tradition. I think if you're casting it downstream, you're holding it off the water, aren't you then?
You're just holding the line.
Yeah, if you're holding it off the water, that's fine, I think. I mean, I understand that. What I don't like is if you cast, you've got to, otherwise it's just going to whiz. You can't have that fly moving at speed. And that's the most important.
It's not natural for a dry.
No, absolutely. No. Yeah, I totally agree, but it's just not. And it is amazing how you get people out and you think, oh, it's lovely, there's nobody here. And I think the river keepers sit with binoculars in their huts. But I mean, a lot of the, I mean, it's terrible, really. A lot of the beats now got CCTV cameras.
No way.
Yeah, they've got CC. And I had, I think I can say this, maybe you need to stop recording this, but we were on a quite well-known beat. And some really nice fish. And I was with a friend who, again, I won't mention, and he said, and we could see these big fish. We were actually throwing bits of bread in, and these fish, he said, have you got a mouse? I said, do you know what? And I have. I've actually got it in here. And we put this mouse on, and this fish just battered it. It was great fun, but then I thought, oh, CCTV camera, that's me, banned from the test for the rest of my life. I think it's just to control the numbers of fish being caught. That's it. Don't ask me, it's historical. It's just, it's what it is. Yeah. So.
We have to wander to the water.
Do you want to have a water? I think you've probably done a lot of that, but maybe just reinforce the presentation cast. And also I think what will be interesting for you to see how it doesn't work as well with a shorter leader, with the presentation cast. You could see when Chris was out there with that 12-foot, I think he's got a 14-foot leader. Yeah. It flutters down. It's just not as good with a 9-foot leader. So
it just kind of kicks back and round.
Yeah, it can do. Okay, shall we go down?
Cool.
So just to reinforce really what the guys were saying, you know, most of the time you see a fish rise and most people have been taught do that nice straight cast out to the fish. You've got that straight line. Now, here there isn't much current, but most places you're fishing, there's a good steady current coming down. And if you do that straight cast with that straight leader and that fly lands, that straight away, that fly is going to start moving incorrectly. It's not going to move naturally, and you just will not catch the fish. They just don't want to have to do it. So anything that can put a bit of slack in is going to help you. So I think even just opening it up and just dropping it down like that, tiny bit of slack, that's nothing, but it will buy you time. And sometimes it makes all the difference between catch and not catch. So even really simple, just wriggle it out there. Tiny bit. Anything that's going to help you just by putting a little bit of slack in. And of course, you can always put in, you know, let's get a cross here actually. It might be a bit better. You can actually
Julie, I've got a question if you don't mind. Just, you know, when you throw in those big wind resistant mayflies,
yeah.
Do you purposely alter this?
I opened the loop up. I think they talked about that earlier. And it's really, so normally to get a nice straight cast and a tight loop, your hand is kind of moving in a straight line, isn't it? It's going from here to here. Because any small movement down here, it's affected up there. So what I mean by that is, if you, in fact, I'll take it to the side, we can see it. So straight, the rod tip is moving in a straight line path, and the cast is following the rod tip, okay? Because everything is moving straight. Imagine the shape of an igloo, okay? I've got an igloo here, so I'm now gonna open, I'm gonna exaggerate it, but if I go around the igloo, can you see what's happened to my loop shape? I've got a big, fat, open loop. Now, with big mayfly, if you want to kind of open it up a little bit, that's much better. You don't want to get getting caught up, absolutely. But to be honest, when I'm casting most of the time, I'm always trying to, yeah, put a bit of slack in if I can, really. So teaching, I'm sure they were doing some aerial mends with you. So start, oh, hang on. Draw a C. Draw the letter C with the rod tip. I'll do it this way, actually. Draw a C, okay, in the air. And then I've got, if the river's here, I've now got a big looper line that's not going to be affected by the current. Yeah, draw a C. And if you do it the other way, draw a question mark with the rod tip. So as it goes out, draw a question mark. That make sense? I find a lot of people find doing aerial mends quite tricky. And also I think you see some people put it out, then do the mend. I don't like that in the chalk streams because it disturbs the water too much. So either do it on the air or don't do it at all. And it's always, as I say, after you've done the stop, give the rod an instruction, okay? Question mark after the stop. And do it slowly, okay? Don't try to do it too quickly. Just do it slowly. As it's coming down, you can pop it in, okay? Now the cast I like teaching people because I find it a lot easier is what I call a reach cast. And it is exactly as it sounds. So with a reach cast, let me get it out here. Where is people? So imagine I'm going out here, okay? Stop, reach, come back. Look at all that line I've put above the current. That's going to buy me time. Does that make sense? Stop, reach, come back. Always come back because you want to be in touch with that fly all the time. Another thing you can do if you just want to put in a little bit of slack, quite often people just do, hang on, stop, drop. You see it just puts a few wrinkles in. Stop and drop. It's tiny, it's subtle, but just putting that little bit of slack makes a difference. Most people who don't put in any slack at all when they're doing these casts and trying to catch these fish, if that fly comes down too fast with any drag, not in a million years your fish going to take it. Well, sometimes they do, but most of the time they do. They don't. Anything else?
I think that's brilliant.
And I think just start to play with your rod. Start to kind of, you got a fish in the corner, just do things with it. Always have it under the greatest thing an instructor, when I was learning, one of the greatest things somebody said to me, so simple. If you've got that fly line under tension, he said, all I'm doing is getting it up in the air, getting it under tension. When I've got it under tension, I can do whatever I want with it. I can play with it. I can do anything. And it's when people don't have it under tension, when they're doing the cast, is when things go wrong. Does that make sense? Any questions about anything?
That was really
Have
good,
I worn
Gilly.
you all out?
Nah, thank you, Gilly. It's been really
pleasure.
good to kind of have a